Do you know what time it is? It's supernatural story time. And if you're easily scared, and even if you're not, there's only one thing left to do. Just turn off the lights, because these are stories that you listen to only in the dark. Encounters with the Unknown, Volume 10, Story Number 1. I live in an old apartment building which I'm convinced is haunted. So much has happened. When I first moved in, I had an image in my mind of an old woman with long blonde hair, which didn't make any sense. I told my landlord, and he freaked out because the previous tenant was an old woman with a long blonde wig. She lived there 22 years, went into a coma, and died. Big deal, I thought. I'm a skeptic. Anyway, I experienced plenty of times when I felt like someone was there. The hair on my neck would go up, and the temperature in the apartment seemed to drop. It made me angry, and I would yell, clap, and wave my arms away, but after a while it felt like it was really powerful. So I tried to make peace by talking to the spirit, if that's what it was. Anyway, after that thing settled down, I began to wake up in the 12 to 2 a.m. hour for no reason, and see things floating above the bed. Weird things that made no sense. They were always white, somewhat translucent, and in a different shape every time. Every single time they would float up to the ceiling and suddenly vanish. Quite honestly, I became amused at these things. I considered they might be hallucinations, but that didn't explain what woke me and why they changed shapes. They never resembled an animal or anything living. Honestly, they were just weird. This really happened. As I said, I grew comfortable seeing these things. One night I awoke and opened my eyes. Floating near the ceiling above me was the full form of a woman. It sounds tacky, I know, and to tell you honestly, I couldn't make out any distinguishing features, but it truly seemed to be a feminine form. I remembered I just sort of lay there gazing up at her, waiting for her to disappear, but she didn't. She floated down towards me. I jerked away, made some kind of bizarre sound like ugh, and she vanished. I haven't seen anything since. I'm still woken up mostly at night by a drop in temperature, which can be easily explained, and by my trembling bed. My bed trembles for a minute more or less every night. I imagine that I feel a presence, but I'm still a skeptic. Anyway, do you think it's my imagination? I'm tempted to believe so, but deep down inside I know it's not. Story number 2. I've always religiously believed in the supernatural. Too many things and bizarre occurrences have happened in my life for me not to. These are just two of the most interesting ones that I hope that you will find mystifying, if not downright enjoyable. During the summer of 1995, I lived in Washington, D.C., where my father had rented an apartment suite at the Watergate. It was a very nice apartment, right across the way from the Kennedy Center on one side, and a hop and a skip away from Georgetown on the other. And since the apartment was at ground level, had a nice fenced-in patio area just several yards away from the main pool. I was working as a White House intern and was just enjoying the first real summer away from parental guidance. After a time, however, I came to realize that I really wasn't as alone as I had thought. Upstairs, there were two bedrooms, the master and a smaller one right across the landing. At first, I decided to take the master because, after all, bigger is supposed to be better, but I quickly changed my mind because, in the dead of night, I'd feel suddenly very cold and very uneasy, as if someone was standing near my bed, its dark shadowy presence vaguely menacing. I didn't know who or what it was. All I really knew was that it was big, male, and didn't seem to like me much as a roomie. After 2 nights of this and getting very little rest, I moved my stuff across the landing to the other bedroom, which was thankfully free of these disturbing vibes. Anyway, about this time my roommate and best friend from college came to visit for a while, and without telling her of my own unsettling experiences, offered her the master bedroom. The very next day she reported the same unnerving sensations. She told me that during the night she felt someone breathing cool air on her cheek. I felt a heaviness on her chest that both scared and kept her awake all night. After that she promptly moved her things into my room as well. Since I knew what she was talking about, I graciously gave in, and the two of us were very careful to never enter into that room unless we absolutely had to, and only in broad daylight. Well, summer came to an end and we both got ready to head back to college. As I was in the bedroom packing, I suddenly heard her calling my name from across the landing. At first, I was puzzled because it was unspoken between us that we never entered that room, and since we didn't have anything in there to pack, I hesitated before answering. Finally, I crossed the landing and entered into the master bedroom, calling out, "Yeah, what do you need?" When I walked in the room, nobody was there. Chilled by the episode, I went downstairs, calling my roommate's name. I finally found her in the kitchen area, the furthest part away in the house from the master bedroom. When I told her what happened, she shook her head in bewilderment and told me that she hadn't called my name and was in fact inside the pantry room packing up some canned goods. When she told me that, my back stiffened and an eerie shiver ran down my spine. Needless to say, we got the heck out of Dodge. An interesting postscript to this tale came near the end of 1998. My mother had been diagnosed with liver cancer in May, and in a desperate bid to lengthen her life, she had decided to become a Buddhist nun. She dressed in a traditional nun's garb and shaved her head, but at the end of September she passed away. During this time, a close friend of hers was in D.C., and so stayed at the Watergate apartment. She had not seen my mother in over a year, and in fact did not even know that my mother had just died less than a week ago. She unpacked and fell asleep in the master bedroom. Around midnight, she awoke because, as she told my father later on, she felt and saw an enormous shadow sitting on her chest, cutting off her breath. She couldn't scream because of the weight, and for a second thought she was dying. She struggled and fought, but the shadow wouldn't budge. She finally drew in one breath and cried out for help. Immediately, she said, she was blinded by a light coming from the closet door, and as the light drew nearer to the bed, she felt the weight suddenly dissipate, the shadow fleeing from the unearthly glow. She opened her eyes and saw a woman standing next to her, brown robes flowing to the ground. Instantly, she said she knew it was my mother, but the only thing that made her wonder was the fact that this woman, this friend she had known for years, was shaved bald. The glowing woman then smiled gently at her and slowly disappeared. Only after this friend of my mother's had told my father about this incident did she learn that indeed, the day my mother died, she had died with a clean-shaven head dressed in brown robes. The second place I experienced the haunting was when I lived in a two-story house on the south side of Las Vegas. The house was owned by a chef in one of the casinos near the Strip and was completely furnished as advertised. As I came from a traditional Asian household, my grandmother also lived with me and my father, and since he was frequently away on business, it was just the two of us there most of the time. The first week we moved in, my grandmother discovered very fine, very black sand would accumulate near the tiled fireplace. And since we didn't ever use the fireplace, we thought it was rather strange. She would sweep it up, throw it away, but the next day it would appear again. This happened for about 4 days in a row. My grandmother, bless her heart, is a Capricorn and thus rather anal about things. She was forever checking doors and windows, making sure they were locked and secured whenever we left the house. So when we came home one day from shopping, we were shocked to see the front door standing wide open. We always came through the garage door, so it was very unsettling to see that door open, knowing we had locked it before leaving. And since the front entrance is protected on one side by the garage, we knew the wind could not have done this. Nothing had been stolen or otherwise disturbed. We ended up not talking about it because, really, what was there to talk about? And put it down to a freak of nature. Well, during this time my father came home from his trip and stayed in the master bedroom. Now, my father is not a man that is given to sudden, wild, and unexplained imaginings. He's 6'2", weighs nearly 200 pounds, and is perhaps one of the most self-assured men I have ever known. But after a week in that room, he abruptly confessed to me one day that there was something else staying in that bedroom with him. He said that whenever he closed his eyes to sleep, he would feel as if someone or something was staring at him through the darkness, and he would then have to get up and sleep with the lights on. At first, I just thought this was ridiculous. I mean, the man has faced down a robber at gunpoint, and he had to sleep with the light on? I smiled and nodded, but didn't think much of it because this was Vegas, not some creepy little Stephen King town filled with outlaw boogeymen. But after he left again, and I decided to stay in the master bedroom, it had a cable, I quickly changed my mind. because as I snapped off the light, I too felt something peering at me through the shadows. It wasn't the same as it was in DC. This one was just as unsettling to be sure, but it wasn't as menacing, just very disturbing. It was almost like it wanted me to notice it. Had something it wanted to tell me? And as I turned on the light, I couldn't help but feel that it also needed me to do something. Finally, one night, I sat up in bed and asked, "Okay, what do you want?" I've had some prior experience with channeling, and this wasn't the first time I'd encountered a restless spirit, so I just bluntly asked it what it wanted of me, so I could finally get a decent night's sleep. When I closed my eyes in exhausted semi-consciousness, it was around 3 a.m. at this time, I saw behind my closed eyelids the pale figure of a woman dressed in white with long black hair down her back. To be honest, I didn't really believe what I was seeing, just thought it was a product of first stage REM cycle. I don't really remember what she looked like, just that she was slender and had curious stains on her white dress. She looked to be in her late 20s to mid 30s. Anyway, she told me that she'd been taken out to the desert, raped, strangled, and buried in the sand where the present house stood. Again, I don't know how much of this is true because I was nearly asleep at the time. But what I can say with certainty was that this spirit was obviously distressed by the manner of her demise, and I felt very sad for her. Later on, I told my grandmother about this, and as she burned paper money for my mother, a traditional act in Asian countries, she would be sure to burn some for the woman in white as well. She would burn the paper money and plead at the same time for this nice lady to not come out and frighten her while she was alone in the house. I thought it was highly amusing at the time and just indulged her whimsical actions. To me, it had been a very vivid dream, and I was not the owner of the house. I certainly couldn't up and dig around the property to substantiate the ghostly claims. After 6 months, the owner of the house was ready to move back in with his family, and so me and my grandmother packed up and moved to the west side. Another 3 months passed before I got a call. It was the owner of the house, and he had a very strange story to tell. First of all, he asked me if when I had lived there did anything weird happen while I was there. Honestly, I told him yes, then told him about what I had experienced, and concluded that I thought the house was haunted. He agreed, telling me that doors had started to open by themselves and that he would hear strange noises at night. Finally, he asked me to speak to his girlfriend because she had a most peculiar dream last night and needed to tell me about it. When she got on the phone, she told me that last night she had dreamed she had walked downstairs to the garage and met a young black-haired woman dressed in a white dress. The woman asked her if I was there because she needed to speak to me. Puzzled, the owner's girlfriend said that sorry, but no, they've moved away. The woman in white had gotten agitated at the response and then asked, "Well, is the grandmother there then?" Again, she replied, "No, she's gone too." At this point, the woman in white became exceedingly upset and started to shout, "But I know she's there. I know, and I need to speak to her now. Please, you've got to let me talk to her." The owner's girlfriend was shocked at the desperation in the other woman's voice and kept repeating, "Sorry, but they're not here." Finally, she woke up, sweat pouring down her face, and immediately asked the owner to contact me. I really wish that I could tell you that there is a proper ending to all this, but since I never went back to the house, nor my grandmother, I don't know what happened in the end. I just thought it thoroughly bizarre that something which I had convinced myself was just a dream was actually probably based in some reality. Perhaps one day I'll get the courage to go back there and tell him what the woman in white had told me and ask that he hand me a shovel. I still think about that poor woman at times, wondering if she's still on her quest to find some sort of justice or peace, and I hope that time really will heal all wounds. I just know that I've been blessed in the sense that I've been given opportunities to touch a world seldom seen by other people, or what they call rational people. And hopefully this will not be a trend that will soon break. I also wish that I could include further incidents that have raised my eyebrows a notch or two, but I think I've taken up enough of your time. Oh, and by the by, my grandmother still burns paper money for the lady in white. She's convinced the poor soul will come after her if she doesn't. Next story. Not too long ago on a Saturday, I took my 18-year-old son for a haircut. had a new boutique around the corner from my home. I happened to know the owner, also a hairdresser slash realtor, and wanted to get my son's hair straightened out. Anyway, with the new girl cutting hair and my friend not there, strange things began to occur. I was behind my son in a chair just talking with a hairstylist, and I would hear rapping on the wall behind us. There have been renovations going on that part of the building, which does have a separate outer entrance from the boutique and will, when it's finished, be housing 3 other businesses. The rapping continued about every 3 to 5 minutes. The stylist and myself went to check to see if anyone was in the other part of the building, all rooms being connected by doorways. Nothing was seen or heard, so she went back to cutting hair and I went back to our general conversation about a new home we were purchasing. My friend the owner walked back in after going on some errands, and when I asked her if anyone was working over in the other part of the building that day, she replied, "It's Saturday. The construction isn't going on today." We were talking about the rapping that was going on earlier, and she proceeded to tell me that a few of her customers had said of seeing a man dressed in a cowboy outfit walk into the bathroom, out again, and then back in. When the person went to use the facilities, it was empty. She told me she had also seen a woman in early 1920s dress. She didn't elaborate on it, but we heard other rappings on the wall. When prodded, she told me nothing was on the other side of that wall, but there was a stairwell leading to the basement. She went to check it out and there was nothing again. After about 15 minutes, there was a really loud banging 3 times on the ceiling, to the point it shook the whole building. I had just had about enough of this crap, so I yelled up at the ceiling, "What the F is your problem?" My son and I both distinctly heard a gruff-sounding woman say, "I'm locked out." I asked the owner again if someone could be on her roof, not realizing there is a small, dark, enclosed room at the top of the staircase with a railing sectioning it off. I got brave, stupid me, and decided I was going to check things out. The owner decided she was going to follow me because she heard the banging too, but I didn't know if she heard the voice. We went around to the other entrance of the building, which is a glass-encased entryway. The front door immediately to the street, I'm told, is locked all the time, and the inside glass door to the same entryway is always unlocked. But at the bottom of the staircase, there is a little anteroom with a heavy metal door, almost like a thin meat locker type, so when you shut it, it stays shut. That door was ajar, about 1 inch to 1.5 inches. I pulled open this big brown metal door and yelled up, "Hello? Is anybody there?" No response. I looked at my friend and said, "Is that door really locked?" She tried and said, "Yeah." So I said again, "Is there anybody up there?" Aggravated at this point and clear as a bell, I heard a younger woman's voice, like it's sitting on the stairs looking at me, say, "Maybe?" in a sarcastic tone. Well, needless to say, not being accustomed to having spirits speak to me, I screamed, slammed the door, and ran, freaked out, from the area. The owner yelled at me. "What the hell are you screaming for?" I said. "You didn't hear that woman say maybe when I asked if anyone was up there before I slammed the door?" She looked very puzzled and said, "No." And she's not one to make up stories, especially not about stuff like this. She told me that if I heard anything and they chose to speak, they can follow you home. I was totally freaking out at this point. You know how you laugh so hard because you're scared? That's how scared I was. I couldn't sleep most of that night, especially after being home for half an hour when my friend called me up and said, "Thank you." And when I said, "What for?" She said because whatever it was hasn't happened again since you left, and that she, her son, and the new stylist went and checked things out and locked things up, and nothing else had happened. I wonder who used to live there, or died there, or haunts there, because I believe there to be quite a few and don't know if there was ever a fire there. I'm told that the old 499 house, a restaurant renamed this because of travel during the 1900s, stopped at this house for overnight stays, has been haunted for years, and not with good spirits either. This is only 1.5 blocks north of this other location. I'm not sure if I should go back. Maybe they can squeeze me in for a haircut and I can find out what happens. But if this thing starts talking to me again, I'm going to bring back my tape recorder and see what I can pick up. Or maybe even better, maybe I just shouldn't go at all and get my hair cut somewhere else. Next story. One summer night around 1978 or 79, when I was around 8 or 9 years old, I encountered someone standing in the doorway of my bedroom. I was sound asleep when for no reason at all I just woke up. I picked up my Sesame Street book and started to read it when I looked over to the door frame, and there was this tall man, almost the height of the door frame, standing there looking at me. He said that I should not worry. He was not going to hurt me. He took 2 steps toward me and I began screaming for my parents. Before I knew it, they were in my bedroom next to me. It was like poof, he was gone, and I didn't see him leave. My parents tried to get me out of the bedroom. I went hysterical. I did not want to pass through where this man had been standing. My dad picked me up and took me into the family room. I sat on my mother's lap, having a nervous breakdown, while my father was getting me some water to try and calm me down. I remember when talking about it, they took me to the emergency room because I lost it. I kept telling them over and over again that there was a man who was at my door and he vanished. Finally, I was able to fall asleep in my mother and father's bed, of course with them there. From that night on, for about 7 or 8 years, I slept with my parents. I'm embarrassed that even into my teenage years, I slept with my mother and father. I never saw him again. I believe that he knew he terrified me and he never showed himself to me. To this day, I don't know who this man at my door was. Thank goodness, because now at 33 years old, I would still be terrified to see someone I know should be dead. Next story. This happened in or around 1998 or so. My mom, my stepdad, and I lived in an older character home on a very quiet street in a nice neighborhood. The house was older and it had a huge backyard with a really old brown shed garage type thing. I was about 14 at the time. There were 2 separate incidents at this house. Anyway, my bedroom was off to the side of the living room. My stepdad, working weird schedules, had a habit of falling asleep on the living room couch and leaving the TV on low, so I didn't think this was anything weird until the next morning. I walked out of my room at about 1 a.m., and to get to the kitchen you had to walk through the living room. I saw the lights from the TV on in the living room, and I looked to see if my stepdad was on the couch, but he wasn't. I figured he went to bed and left the TV on. I continued walking into the living room, and the TV went off. I thought maybe I stepped on the remote or something. I looked down and there was a black scuff mark looking thing on the floor. We had hardwood. I took my foot off of it and the TV went back on. Stepped again, TV went off, etc. I thought nothing of it, thinking maybe I was half asleep and I was seeing things, or I was stepping on something and I just couldn't tell what it was. A little freaked out, I went to my mom's room to see if she could hear the TV or to see if maybe the power went out. I got to their room and woke my mom up, asked her if she could hear the TV or what was going on, and she told me to go back to bed and that I was probably dreaming. I asked where my stepdad was, and my mom said he was working nights that week. He left about 7 p.m. that night and didn't return around till 3 a.m., long after this incident happened. So I said, fine, no big deal. I'll go to bed. So I went back to my room only to find that my garbage can had moved. Normally it was under my desk, but when I got back to my room, it was moved to the middle of the doorway. I know I didn't move it there because why would I leave my room, then barricade it with my garbage can? Fine, whatever, I thought, and went back to sleep. The next morning at breakfast, my mom asked what last night was all about, what happened, and at first she seemed like she didn't believe me, and then she asked me if I remembered what was on TV. Without hesitation, I said, Jenny Jones. Of all the shows, why would I say Jenny Jones if I was lying? She remembered it was about 1 a.m. when I woke her up, and she looked in the TV guide, and sure enough, starting at 12:45 a.m. on channel 28 was Jenny Jones. I went to show her the scuff mark, but of course it was gone. The remote was on top of the TV. I could tell by the goosebumps on her arms that she believed me. The other incident happened to my stepdad. We were outside barbecuing one evening, and my mom was in the house preparing the table. I saw him looking up at the shed in the backyard. The thing was almost all windows with the exception of the door, and his face went white. I'm talking about whiter than white itself. He dropped his barbecue sauce on the ground as he was still looking at whatever it was he saw. He's a big tough guy and never gets creeped out. He ran inside the house and told my mom he saw some kind of old woman in the window of the shed. My mom laughed at him until she saw that he was dead serious. He described her as short, with short gray hair, wearing a light blue shirt or dress. He said she wasn't scary looking, but just that she was looking through the window staring right at him. The description he gave was identical to what my grandmother looked like, who passed away 10 years before my mom even met my stepdad. So he couldn't have known what she looked like unless he'd seen the very few pictures we had of her. And even then, why would he play such a sick joke? Next story. I used to work part-time for 5 years at this Catholic church gift shop. Normally when people shop there, they check the quality, the looks of what we sell. Bottom line is they take their time unless they're regular there and know what they want already. Sometime during the year, it's 1998, I noticed this woman buying lots of crosses without taking her time. She looked puzzled and worried. I didn't hesitate to ask her why she was buying so many crosses. She looked at me and took a deep breath. Well, she said, it's about my daughter. When she was 1 year old until about the beginning of her preschool, she's had this imaginary friend. I would see her playing by herself and talking as if someone is there with her. She would giggle like someone made her laugh. I thought it was just an ordinary imaginary friend. Every single day she'd play with this friend until she started going to school and played with real kids all the time. One night she ran into our room crying. I asked her, what's going on? Why? What happened? And then she's saying this imaginary friend of hers, which is, by the way, she calls Amanda, wanted to play with her, and she doesn't want to anymore. She was shaking while crying out loud. I kept asking her, what's wrong with Amanda? Then finally she said, she scares me. And I kind of laughed at her because I thought she liked this Amanda. I insisted, asking, why is she scaring you? Then she said, because Amanda doesn't have a head. Oh my, I freaked out about this, and so while this lady's telling me, I told her that St. Benedict is really good for putting away bad spirits, so she bought that one too. Apparently after 2 to 3 weeks, a lady visited me again with her daughter and told me they had moved out because Amanda gets mad at her if she doesn't play with her either. Next story. Growing up, I heard that the high school that I attended was haunted by a former student. Apparently, the student was struck in the head with a shot put during gym class and died. Although occasionally you would hear a rumor of his hauntings, I never heard of a specific incident. I didn't take this story seriously until I had an experience around November 1987. I was a senior in high school at the time and a drummer for our jazz ensemble. Within the jazz ensemble, 4 of us got together to form a jazz combo band. We would practice at various places, but sometimes we would meet at school to practice in the band or chorus room. I think it was over Thanksgiving vacation when we scheduled a practice for either a Friday or Saturday morning. All but one of our members showed up on time, and after tuning and warming up for a while, we decided to go call to see where Mark was. This was before the age of cell phones, so we went out to the payphone, which was located next to a series of doors leading directly into the gymnasium. Although all the other hallways were dark, the area where we were located was well lit. Next to the gymnasium, a set of steps went down to where the locker rooms and some classrooms were located. The steps were closed off by a large accordion-style gate. After we called Mark's house, he told us he was on his way, so we decided to wait there for him. While we waited and talked, we thought we heard some noises coming from the gym or downstairs. It sounded like someone walking or running, and then it would stop. As we waited, leaning against this large gate, we heard the noise again, but this time it seemed to be coming from right behind the door next to us. Instantly we got quiet and looked at the door in shock. Within a split second after this, the door jolted and flew open towards us. We were all hit by a cold wind across our bodies. Instantly we all jumped and started running down the hallway in fear for our lives. All 3 of us were sprinters in track, and I believe we all could have set state records for how fast we ran that morning. After a lot of swearing and freaking out, we went back down and the door was closed. We watched from a distance to see if it would happen again, but it didn't. No one else was in the school at the time, and we know our friend didn't have anything to do with it. Our only guess is this was the ghost of the student watching over the school. A year later, while I was in college, I worked one summer at the school as a janitor. I shared this story with the full-time janitors, and they said they had experience where the doors would open and close behind them and felt like they were being followed. Next story. This is a true and accurate event that even I wouldn't believe it if I hadn't been there and had my mother with me at the time to reassure me that it did indeed happen and that I am not crazy. Both my mother and myself worked at the American Legion post number 6. This particular post is in a 100 plus year old building and has been a private club for the military men since it opened. A lot of military men and their families have held memberships at this club for decades, and many of those have passed on from battle and from old age alike, so you can imagine the energy that runs through this place. Well, one night at around 1 a.m. after our shift, we were the bartenders. We were sitting at the end of the bar counting out our tills and talking about the usual gossip when all of a sudden, directly above our heads, one of the speakers started booming very loud and methodically. Needless to say, we were both startled, and because of previous experience that we and other employees had, neither of us was in a big hurry to go to the stage and check the plugs to be sure that the band hadn't left the mic plugged in. It sounded like the same kind of boom that the kids play through their speakers in the cars they drive. Well, anyway, I decided I wanted to get the heck out of there, and I knew we couldn't leave and let the building catch fire because we were too scared to unplug the darn equipment. So I started toward the stage very quickly while telling myself that it was silly to be afraid and I just needed to do it and get it over with. When I got to the stage, I climbed up the front because I sure as heck wasn't about to go around the back behind the curtains. I went over to the place where the surge protectors were plugged in, and nothing was still plugged in. As I turned around, I started getting very sick to my stomach, and a sort of dread rushed through my body. When I looked out across the dance floor to where my mother was, right there in front of me was a man about 6 feet tall and dressed in a brown flannel shirt with a pair of old tattered pants. I stopped breathing, and I don't know how long it was before my mother had seen what was going on and she yelled, "Hey, how the hell did you get in there?" "We're closed and we're already locked up." It was then that he just faded. I was in hysterics and my mom was in shock, so we ran for the door. As she was digging in her bag for the keys so we could leave, the door unlocked and violently swung open. We didn't hesitate to get out. Behind us, the door shut and locked all in one motion, and on the other side of the glass door was the man in the flannel shirt, scowling at us. The next morning, we went in to let our manager know what happened, and she had a surprise for us. The tape from the security cameras showed exactly what happened, only instead of the man, it was a foggy light. After we had left, the cameras continued to tape the tables, sliding around, and glasses being knocked off the shelves. We did continue our jobs, and eventually we moved on. Nothing as dramatic as that winter night ever happened to us again. But still, all of us continued to see, hear, feel, and know that we were not ever alone.